Red Bull endured a very difficult weekend after quite a long time as Max Verstappen retired from the race and wasn't able to complete it due to an issue with the car. However, after the latest statements from the team, it seems like even with Verstappen on the grid, the pace that the Ferraris have found would have been too much to handle for the Austrian squad. So with this in mind, could we see closer battles in the following races? And more importantly, what does Imola have in store for us in terms of Ferrari's upgrades challenging Red Bull's lead? Although the first two races of the season hinted that the 2024 campaign could be over before it started, it seems like we would have to wait for Ferrari to answer this question. After Verstappen endured the issues with his brakes, which is nothing to be extremely worried about but was a serious problem that caused his car to retire, he opened up the grid for a potential win by his teammate, who was undoubtedly the second fastest driver in the first two races. However, Perez finished P5 in the race and wasn't even close to competing with the McLaren drivers, let alone Ferraris ahead. And when talking about this matter, the Mexican driver feels like the DNF of Verstappen wouldn't have changed a thing for how this race would have ended, as he added. As a team, we just didn't have the pace today. We didn't have the pace throughout the weekend. We were already struggling since Friday, and we never got on top of the tire management. I think we just have to understand and make sure we're able to improve. We already saw last year in a track like this, for example in Vegas, a front-limited track, that Ferrari was a lot stronger than us. So we just couldn't look after the front tires. Ferrari would have won even if Verstappen hadn't retired. Absolutely yes. Apart from Perez, even Sainz believes that if the retirement of Verstappen didn't happen and the DRS was wide open from lap 2, we would have had a much closer race than we were normally used to, because he felt like the pace was there, and the dominance of the RB20 would have been brought under a huge challenge. Talking about this matter to a further extent, Sainz went on to say, "It was a really good race. I felt really good out there. I'm very happy, very proud of the team, and happy to be in a 1-2 with Charles here. I felt like I could keep up with Verstappen on the first lap and try to take the DRS. DRS around here is super powerful. Then Verstappen lost the car in turn 3 and there was my chance to get close and attempt an overtake. And then as soon as he was behind, I think he started struggling with the brakes and that was it for him. It is a pity because we would have had, I think, a very good fight for P1 today. But I'm happy to take the win. Verstappen has had plenty of them. So I'm happy to be back here." Now, the issue with Red Bull is exactly what Ferrari have and what the Austrian team praised they could have if these difficult times become more frequent realities, two very strong drivers that they could rely on. The reality in Melbourne is that Perez wasn't even close to the top 3, and while that was a constant picture we used to see in the 2023 season, it was his teammate up front who brought the big points for the team. While Perez did pick up some damage when trying to pass Alonso and therefore sustained a reduction in downforce due to the impaired floor, something Christian Horner opened up about, finishing 40 seconds behind the leading pack is just way too much for a car that used to dominate the first two races in such a manner. But furthermore, Verstappen went on to talk about the incident and how it doesn't create too much drama for him. Then again, it's something that should be fixed immediately, and that's why his reaction when interacting with the engineer was a bit fiercer than expected, which could be described as Verstappen in his natural habitat. Even if the issue was persistent on the car and he would have built a 20-second lead with it, I'm sure we would have heard a lot from him about it. So this interaction itself is not enough to fuel talks about potential turmoil in Red Bull and how the team started to fall apart after an issue caused Verstappen's car to fail. However, it's more than evident that the SF24 is much closer to Red Bull, and they are far away from the finished product in 2024. On top of that, Verstappen took a second PU engine in Melbourne, and prior to that in Jeddah he took a new exhaust system, with the latter one having 8 pieces allowed to change, but once you do change an entire PU unit, you change the exhaust system with it as well. Although it's evident that the engine of Verstappen did not sustain any damage and could be used in the following races as well, the fact that the Dutchman took it at the third race of the season does have the potential to raise some questions around the reliability of the car. But Verstappen went on to deny these claims, as he elaborated on the reason why his team decided to take a new power unit for the remainder of the weekend, further adding, "During free practice, I ran over a curb. The mechanics wanted to change the engine just to be sure. We could have continued driving with the other engine, but they wanted the new one just to be sure. Elaborating on the retirement in the race, Verstappen acknowledged that the issue needs to be fixed as soon as possible, and one of similar nature shouldn't happen to them in the foreseeable future, adding, "I'm disappointed with not being able to finish the race because I think we would have had a good shot at winning because the balance felt quite nice on the laps to the grid. I felt confident and made a good improvement compared to what I felt in the long runs when we did in practice. But yeah, there are some things you cannot control. We had a lot of good races in a row, a lot of good reliability, and I knew that the day would come when you would end up having a retirement, and unfortunately, that day was today. Of course, you never like to see it happen to your team, but that is in the past, and now it's more important that we understand why it happened. Regardless, this gives the Austrian team only one more engine available for the remainder of the season before they suffer from grid penalties if they are to take new engines additionally, which, while didn't hurt Verstappen's chances in the previous years, could paint a different picture in 2024, given the fact that the McLarens, who were dubbed to struggle in Melbourne due to their DRS inefficiency and top speed issues, as well as the Ferraris, who are breathing in Red Bull's necks, is a reality in which we are living in right now. The Maranello team plans to bring a lot of upgrades to Imola, which is more or less their home race after Monza, and it seems like they have a lot of confidence that this race will have a very strong influence on where the team will continue to move forward. The general belief is that Ferrari is close, but they do need that one extra step to be on the same level as Verstappen, because if we're being honest, Perez is not really in the mix of winning races in the current state he's driving, at least if we are to judge from the Melbourne race. Therefore, his seat would be brought into question yet again, and although we should not be raising yet another speculation because the primary candidate for his replacement, Daniel Ricciardo, isn't doing the best of work right now in the Racing Bulls, being completely outperformed by Tsunoda, it does spell a bit of bad news for Red Bull's future if they are to think about the second seat, or even more frightening, if Verstappen decides to leave in some wildly twisted scenario. With this in mind, there is a serious threat that Red Bull might face from Ferrari even before Imola, because they are to bring their controversial design revolving around the cooling inlets around the sidepod area, which would remind us a lot about the design that the W13 and the W14's original versions had in the past. But with Red Bull being forced to chase a new direction due to them being vulnerable if they stayed with the same design, and with Ferrari as well as McLaren having solidified their platforms from last year and now being eager to add upgrades to see whether they can close the gap to the Austrian team, the remainder of the 2024 season could give us a lot to think about, and more importantly, it could bring a lot of interesting racing moments that could spice up the championship battle. Do you think that Ferrari has what it takes to battle with Verstappen up front? Let us know in the comments below.